He didn't plan to stay long. Just a funeral, a few days, then back to his life. But something in that old kitchen wouldn't let him leave. It started with a rusty tin box and a funeral. Julian hadn't been back to Sweetwater, Georgia, in over 12 years. Not since his mother died. The town hadn't changed much, still the same peeling paint on the grocery store awning, the same cracked sidewalk in front of the church where kids once rode bikes. But the air felt heavier now, like time had thickened it. His grandmother, Mabel, had been 93. Tough as overcooked brisket, sharp as a fresh peach pit. She had raised Julian after his parents' accident, and though she never said the word love out loud, she put it into every bite of food she made. Biscuits that melted like clouds, cobbler that made your eyes roll back, and the cornbread, God, the cornbread. The will was simple. A small plot of land, an ancient pickup truck, and that tin box. Inside were yellowed index cards with curling edges, smudged with flour, grease, and time. Each one held a recipe in Mabel's precise, looping script. Some had notes in the margins. Too dry with store-bought buttermilk. Add lard if using cast iron. Julian hadn't planned to stay. He had a failing job as a junior associate in a faceless Atlanta office, an apartment he shared with a roommate he barely knew. He came back for the funeral, maybe a week to clear her things, then back to anonymity. But on the third day, something pulled at him. He found himself in the kitchen, barefoot, same as when he was 9, flipping through those cards. He picked one at random, sweet corn custard pie. It was absurdly simple. And yet, as it baked, the house began to smell like memory. Like childhood summers, scraped knees, and silent prayers whispered over dinner. He posted a picture of the pie on Instagram. A joke. #Grandma's Revenge. By the next day, his DMs were full. Old friends, strangers, even a food blogger asking for the recipe. He didn't reply. The next week, he made the cornbread. He remembered her rules: no sugar, yellow cornmeal only, and it had to be baked in the heavy cast iron skillet she brought from Alabama. He followed every step, even down to resting the batter while the skillet heated. He brought the finished pan to the church for the Friday night community dinner. Mostly out of guilt. Or nostalgia. Maybe both. By the time he came back from the bathroom, it was gone. Every crumb. "You make this?" asked Deacon Royce, licking his thumb. Julian nodded. The old man chuckled, shaking his head. "Mabel's boy. She'd be proud. You ever think of selling this?" He laughed, deflecting. But the next week, he made more. By the third Friday, folks were slipping him 5s and 10s. "Just bring that cornbread, son." By week 6, he'd bought a used mixer and cleaned out Mabel's garage. Painted a sign, "Mabel's Table." He sold out in 2 hours. And then came the woman from Atlanta. Shiny shoes, leather portfolio, a real estate smile. "Have you ever thought of opening a cafe?" Julian hesitated. Looked down at his hands, still dusted with cornmeal. He thought about Mabel's silence. About how she let her food do the talking. "Maybe," he said. The woman's name was Lee Palmer. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and a confidence that didn't flinch under Sweetwater's sun. She wasn't just a developer, she was a scout. Lee represented a group of investors backing promising small food ventures, and something about Julian's cornbread had stirred more than just local nostalgia. "I don't pitch unless I believe in something," she said, stirring her iced tea with the straw but not drinking it. "And your story has legs. Southern tradition, family recipes, authentic voice. People eat that up." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You mean metaphorically?" She smiled. "For now." He didn't trust it. Too slick. Too fast. He was still getting used to waking up without the sound of Mabel's old radio in the kitchen. Still not sure if he wanted roots here or wings somewhere else. But she left a card. And a thought that festered all night. The next day, he drove 2 hours into Atlanta. Stood outside a row of cafes in Inman Park. Watched people drink $6 coffees and eat cupcakes with edible gold. He wasn't jealous. He was curious. Wondered if Mabel's cornbread had a place in that world. That night, he found her recipe again. Same curling card, same ink that had faded at the edges. But something new caught his eye, a barely legible note, Julian's favorite, add honey butter. He hadn't remembered that. But he did now. She used to set a tiny pot of whipped honey butter just for him, said it made the cornbread smile. He tried it. Baked a new batch. Posted a video of him pulling the hot skillet from the oven, the butter melting over the crust, a soft hiss rising. He went to sleep. By morning, the video had 18,000 views. 3 people had already messaged him asking if he shipped nationwide. It was absurd. It was terrifying. But it was real. Within a week, he registered a business license. Mabel's Table was no longer just a painted sign in a garage, it was a brand. Lee came back, this time with a contract. Small space, low rent, just enough to get started. Pop up first. Prove the concept, she said. You can bake. I'll handle the rest. Julian stared at the papers. This wasn't what he came home for. But what had he come for, really? He signed. The pop-up opened in the back of a refurbished gas station off Highway 11. 1 table. A chalkboard menu. Cornbread. Pie. 1 rotating daily special pulled from Mabel's cards. He didn't sleep the night before opening. He oversalted the first batch. Dropped the second. Burned the third. But by noon, a line had formed. By 3 p.m., they were out of everything. A woman with a baby on her hip leaned across the counter. You better not vanish, baby, she said, grinning. You got something special here. Julian smiled, bone-tired but full in a way he hadn't felt in years. That night, he sat on the back steps of the station, watching the last light slip behind the trees. He whispered to the sky. Thanks, Mabel. And for the first time since the funeral, the grief felt lighter. Success, Julian discovered, was not a straight line, it was a spiral of exhaustion, surprise, and small victories that only made sense in retrospect. By the 3rd month, Mabel's Table had a waiting list. Not for tables, there was still just the one, but for wholesale. A local grocer wanted to stock his cornbread mix. A boutique catering company offered him $10,000 to license the honey butter recipe. And Lee. She was talking about franchising. You're not just selling food, she said over coffee one morning, you're selling sentiment. Southern warmth. A sense of home. Julian wasn't sure he liked the way she said it. Like it was a trick. A marketing ploy. But she wasn't wrong. Every day, someone cried in his cafe. A woman whose father used to make the same chess pie every Sunday. A man who hadn't tasted real grit since his grandmother passed. A teenage girl who said the cornbread reminded her of being hugged. Julian started writing their stories down. A notebook filled with crinkled pages and coffee stains, names and moments. He kept it behind the register, next to the old tin box. It grounded him. But not everything was honey and flour. The pressure built. Lee pushed him to hire more staff. To outsource production. To streamline. You can't scale a memory, he said, tired. You don't have to, she replied. Just replicate the feeling. Julian hired 2 assistants. A soft-spoken baker named Danny, and a college dropout named Marcus with hands like bread paddles and an intuitive sense for seasoning. They were good people. But still, every change felt like a betrayal. He stopped going barefoot in the kitchen. Stopped using the old cast iron skillet, too slow. Even the honey butter was made in bulk now, from a machine. But the line outside never shrank. Then came the article. A Southern revival, how one man's grandmother brought comfort back to the table. Featured in Southern Living. With it, a photo of Julian, apron dusted, eyes tired, but smiling. The story ran deeper than he expected. The reporter had somehow found out about the car crash that took his parents. About the lonely years. About Mabel's quiet ferocity. The morning after the article ran, Julian found a letter taped to the door. No name. Just handwriting that jolted something deep in his chest. It read. She gave you her food, yes. But don't forget what she really left you. Her silence was never empty. He read it 3 times before unlocking the door. That day, he burned 2 batches. He shouted at Marcus. He forgot to turn the open sign. And that night, he dreamed of Mabel, not young, not old, just there. Stirring something in a bowl. Not speaking, but watching. When he woke, he pulled out the tin box and flipped through the recipes again. Not for a new idea. Just to remember. Midway through, he found a folded piece of paper he'd never seen. Not a recipe. A letter. To him. Written in that same careful script. His hands trembled as he opened it. Julian. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And you stayed. That surprises me more than it should. You were always meant for more than suits and screens. There are things I never said, because I didn't know how. My own mother raised me hard and quiet, and I passed some of that on to you. I regret it. Not the discipline, but the silence. Love isn't something I wore well. But it was in the biscuits. In the way I saved the last piece of pie for you, even when I wanted it myself. It was in the skillet you kept reaching for even after I said, hot, and you touched it anyway. You were always stubborn. But you learned. That's what I loved best. If you're still cooking, good. But don't lose yourself to it. Food is the doorway, not the house. People don't come for the cornbread. They come for the way you remember them. For the way you make them feel like they matter. So remember this, protect the small things. Not the business. Not the brand. The stories. The people. That's the real recipe. Love. Mabel. Julian read it 5 times before the sun rose. He didn't cry, not then. But something cracked open inside him, quiet and final, like a window that had been nailed shut for too long. He made one decision that morning, no more franchising. Lee didn't take it well. You're turning down $500,000, Julian. No, he said. I'm turning down losing what this is. She leaned back, crossing her arms. It's nostalgia. You're selling a dream, not a meal. He nodded. Exactly. A week later, Lee withdrew her investment. The bank retracted a line of credit. Suppliers hesitated. But Julian felt lighter. Like he could breathe again. And then, something unexpected happened. The stories took over. Customers began leaving handwritten notes under plates, in napkin folds, tucked into the tips jar. Little memories. My mama used to hum while stirring just like this. First time I've felt home in years. My brother's funeral was last week. This helped. Julian strung them up on a clothesline across the wall, the memory wall. Soon, locals came just to read the notes. Some cried. Some laughed. Some added their own. One day, a man in a pressed shirt and military cut came in. He ordered the collard greens and sat silently for an hour before standing. My grandmother used to feed the whole neighborhood. During rationing, too. This place smells like her porch, he said. Then, I hadn't remembered that until just now. Julian nodded, heart tight. Mabel's table became something else. Not a restaurant. Not a brand. A haven. Word spread, but not through marketing or ads. Through stories. A podcast picked it up. Then a documentary crew. They wanted to shoot a short feature, Where Southern Memory Lives. Julian said yes, but only if the crew talked to the customers, not him. He didn't need the spotlight. He had the skillet. And the tin box. That night, as he closed the cafe, Marcus and Danny lingering behind to mop and laugh about a spilled tray of beans, Julian felt it again, that same warmth as the first bite of pie he baked when he came home. He whispered into the dark, still protecting the small things, Mabel. And he swore he heard her laugh. The documentary came out 3 months later. Just 15 minutes long, grainy in parts, and set to soft banjo and piano. But it went viral. Overnight, Julian's phone blew up. Texts, emails, missed calls. A national morning show wanted him to fly to New York. A food magazine offered a cover story. He said no to both. He didn't trust that kind of attention. It came fast, and it left even faster. But the orders didn't slow down. Tourists drove hours. Some left notes on their napkins just to say they had been there. The memory wall stretched to the ceiling. And then came the letter. From a lawyer. It arrived in a thick envelope with a return address from Charleston. Julian opened it with a sigh, expecting some kind of cease and desist. Maybe a health inspection complaint. But it was a will. Mabel had a sister. Died 20 years back. And her daughter, Julian's cousin, someone he didn't even know existed, had passed away recently, leaving behind a son. 6 years old. Name, Elijah. No known father. No extended family. Except Julian. There was a photo. A boy with deep-set eyes and a crooked smile. Julian stared at it for a long time, the letter trembling in his hand. Custody, he said aloud, to no one. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he'd made his decision. He drove to Charleston, met Elijah in a too-quiet group home. The boy was skittish, didn't smile much, and flinched when people spoke too loud. But when Julian handed him a cornbread muffin, warm from the box, Elijah looked up and said, "It smells like someone missed me." Julian blinked hard. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think they did." Bringing Elijah home was like resetting his life. The cafe adjusted. Customers asked questions, but mostly they nodded and offered support. Some brought little gifts. Books, puzzles, a handmade apron embroidered with Mabel's little sous chef. Julian didn't know how to parent. Not really. He burned dinner more often than not. Elijah had night terrors, and trust was slow to build. But then came a rainy Wednesday. Julian had left a bowl of dough rising on the counter. Elijah patted in, still in pajamas, and poked the soft center with his finger. "Can I try?" It was how it began. Flour on the floor. Batter on the walls. But the boy laughed, a real, cracking laugh that filled the house in a way it hadn't been filled since Mabel. From that day on, they baked together every Thursday morning. A new recipe each week. Julian let Elijah pick from the tin box. One day, the boy found a blank card tucked between 2 pie recipes. He looked up. "What's this one?" Julian smiled. "That one's for you." They called it Elijah's apple spoon bread. Light, sweet, with a hint of cinnamon. Customers lined up for it, but Julian never added it to the menu board. Only served on Thursdays. Only if Elijah helped make it. The cafe changed again. Not bigger, Julian refused to expand, but deeper. People came not just for food, but for what the place gave them, a sense that something lasting still existed in a world that moved too fast. And at the heart of it all, a man with flour on his sleeves, a boy with sticky fingers, and a tin box full of recipes that carried more than taste. They carried legacy. Winter came hard that year. Sweetwater doesn't often get snow, but when it does, the world hushes. Roads ice over, schools close, and everyone stays home unless they have a good reason not to. The cafe shut its doors for 2 days, the first time since it opened. Julian used the time to repaint the kitchen walls. Elijah helped, mostly by getting paint in his hair and singing off-key to the radio. But on the 3rd day, Julian woke to find a note slid under the door. Scrawled in crayon. "Can you open? Mama says she needs your peach cobbler to remember things." No name. Just the plea. He looked out the window. The snow had begun to melt. The roads were passable. He turned to Elijah, who was sitting on the floor building a tower of spice jars. "Wanna bake?" The boy grinned. "Always." They opened at noon. By 3 o'clock, the cafe was full. No marketing. No post. Just need and word of mouth. People came wrapped in scarves, red noses and wool gloves, asking for warmth in the form of cornbread, cobbler, hot cider. Julian watched them come and go, each one carrying something invisible. Grief. Loneliness. A memory too sharp to hold on their own. That night, as they cleaned, Danny pulled him aside. "There's a guy who's been coming every Sunday," she said quietly. "Sits by the window, always orders 2 plates. One untouched. Julian remembered him. Older, always alone. Sharp suit, pressed cuffs. No conversation. Talk to him today, Danny added. His wife passed last fall. They used to come here together. He keeps ordering for her. Julian nodded, the weight of it settling in his chest like wet sand. That weekend, he wrote something new on the chalkboard. If you're missing someone, order a plate for them. On the house. Memory deserves a seat. It caught fire. Within a week, there were dozens of extra plates served. Unclaimed food that no one took home. Dishes left with notes. Photos. Drawings from children. Mabel's table became a living altar. One Thursday, Elijah sat at the counter, licking honey butter from a spoon, and asked, "Do people always hurt this much?" Julian set down the mixing bowl, sat beside him. "Only when they've loved hard," he said. "Is that bad?" Julian thought about it. "No. It's what makes the food taste better." They sat in silence, the cafe dim around them, the hum of the fridge the only sound. Then came the man in the gray coat. He didn't look like the others. Not a regular. Not a local. Clean-shaven, black wool gloves, eyes sharp and searching. He ordered coffee. Nothing else. Watched the wall of memories. Said nothing. Before he left, he slipped an envelope to Julian. No return address. Inside was a check. For $250,000. And a note, "This belongs to something true. Do not let it die." No name. Julian stood frozen for a full minute. Elijah looked up from his drawing. "Is it a present?" Julian laughed, breathless. "Maybe. Or a test." He didn't deposit it right away. He put the check in the tin box, beneath Mabel's recipes. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about deciding what to do with something that big without making something small disappear. Spring arrived soft and early, green vines curling along the cafe's windows, the scent of fresh thyme drifting through the door as if coaxed by memory. The check still sat in the tin box, untouched. Every few days, Julian would open the lid, look at it, then gently close it again. It wasn't about indecision. It was about respect. Money this large could build. But it could also erase, flatten the soul out of something tender and lived in. The answer came, unexpectedly, from Elijah. They were cleaning after a busy Thursday. Elijah was wiping down tables, careful and deliberate. He paused, looking up at the wall of notes, now overflowing and clipped in rows that zigzagged like a heartbeat. "Can we make a cookbook?" he asked. "So people don't forget." Julian paused mid-sweep. "You mean, with Mabel's recipes?" "And the notes," Elijah said. "The stories. Like, every recipe gets one." Julian felt the breath catch in his throat. That night, he pulled out the tin box again. This time, he added a clean stack of cards. Blank. Ready. He, Elijah, Danny, and Marcus spent evenings after closing copying recipes, transcribing notes, even inviting customers to contribute their memories in longer form. It took 3 months. When they finished, the book was thick and warm in the hand, part cookbook, part memory journal. They called it Tables Remember. Julian used the mysterious check to print the first run, 1,000 copies. Self-published. Hand-stitched spines. Elijah insisted on drawing the cover, a skillet with steam rising into shapes of people laughing, embracing, dancing. The book sold out in 10 days. Not to tourists. To people who had sat at the cafe's single table. Who had cried, laughed, remembered. People who'd left behind stories on napkins and notes. Each one was mailed with a handwritten thank you card. Julian wrote every single one. A publisher offered a national release. Julian declined. Instead, he took the remaining money and bought the building that housed Mabel's table. No more rent. No more pressure. Just permanence. He built a second table. Not to expand, just to let strangers sit together more easily. Sometimes, on slow afternoons, he and Elijah would bake something just for themselves. Not for the menu. Not for sale. Just for the joy. They'd eat on the back step, like Mabel used to, watching the sun melt into the trees. Julian was not a millionaire in the conventional sense. But people began to say his name like it meant comfort. And when he walked through Sweetwater, heads turned not because he was famous, but because he'd done something rare. He'd turned memory into presence. Grief into gratitude. Recipes into something sacred. Years later, when Elijah grew tall and quiet like Julian once was, he added a new card to the tin box. Written in the same careful hand. It read, "Love, like flour, gets into everything if you let it." And that's the whole point.